Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Justin Corman, and I am a first-year MBA candidate here at MIT Sloan. And it's my pleasure to introduce to you all our next panel, The Future of Sports Business. Our panelists today are Jessica Gelman, Chief Executive Officer of Kraft Analytics Group, Brian Rolap, Chief Media and Business Officer at the National Football League, and Amy Howe, Chief Executive Officer of FanDuel. Our panel will be moderated by Abe Madcore from Sports Business Journal. The panel will run for about 40 minutes and we'll save 5 minutes at the end for Q&A. Please submit all questions via the Cadence app. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Abe.
Wait, you don't go anywhere. Give it up for Justin. What a great job he's done. Good work.
Thank you.
All right. How's everyone doing? Come on. Having a good morning? All right, we're going to start the afternoon in fantastic style. I'll take your questions at any time, not just the last 10 minutes. You're all the one, it's your panel. We want to address what you want to hear. Great panel list, so let's get right into it. I'll start with you, Amy Howe. We'll go down the line. The trend or development in the sports business over the last year that interested you the most is what?
Jess Gelman turning 50.
Woo! Give it up for the birthday girl.
It's her birthday. Do we all know that already? Okay.
That is a good one.
I've got two. She's
Amy.
now in the 50 club. I've been in it a few years. So, the explosive growth of women's sports, we're seeing it in our business. WNBA has been through the roof, and I think we're just getting started. And I'm sure we'll talk about this later, a trend that I think is literally just starting to impact our world is AI, Gen AI, large language models. To some degree, we've been using it for a long time, but we're barely scratching the surface, I think, on what it can do to the entire sports ecosystem.
Quick follow-up on women's sports. Did the timing surprise you, or is it just the perfect storm of great athletes getting the exposure they deserve?
It was that. It's the player narratives. When the player narratives take off, I mean, Caitlin Clark has really transformed not just women's basketball, but women's sports. I mean, we had a 300% year-on-year increase in WNBA, in large part to Caitlin Clark.
Brian Rolap.
I would have said women in sports. Amy
Sorry.
took mine. That's okay. But I totally agree with that. When it's great to see 50 years of Title IX, really coming to fruition on all levels of women's sports. That's a trend I think is going to continue to go. I think one thing that I don't think it surprised me, it's coming a little quicker than I thought. The gap between viewership of live event programming on streaming versus linear television has closed, I think, a lot quicker than I would have guessed in the last probably 24 months. But I think that's an interesting trend to continue to watch.
I.e. more people are watching via streaming than you anticipated in terms of via linear.
Yeah, when we moved Monday Night Football to ESPN in 1987, way before my time, was the first time that we took a major package and put it on a new media platform, and that was a gap of paid television and linear broadcast and viewership for the same game that probably existed for 25 years. We expected the same on streaming. We put 15 Thursday Night Football games on Amazon. We thought, okay, there's going to be a reach gap that's probably going to persist for a long time. It's actually closing pretty quickly. Yeah.
Got it. Jess.
So college sports to me has been so disrupted, and there's so many different players trying to get into it. That has been really, I mean, just the growth there. Obviously, we do a ton of work with the NCAA, but to see the effort that the NCAA is doing and how quickly the roles of who is leading athletic departments is changing, that's surprising. The other thing I would just say from on the data side of things that we're seeing, in a way we haven't seen before. Amy, I know this is core to who you are, but the sponsors are really they're coming and asking us for help to prove out the ROI of their sponsorships and to get more targeted and personalized to the extent that they can to reach their customers. And I think streaming plays a part in that. But that sponsor turnaround, and we've done some really interesting work with a number of organizations, that's very unique. I haven't seen it in.
You think there's going to be two tiers in college sports?
Yes, I do. And holistically, I think specifically for Olympic sports and women's sports, we have to figure out how to not lose the pipeline. And I think what the NFL is doing with flag football and women's flag and as an Olympic sport is super important. But it's very disruptive in a way that I haven't seen before.
As we talk about the future of sports business, which is the topic of the panel, this morning it was asked of Mark Shapiro and Jonathan Kraft about potential headwinds. There's a lot of bullishness about the sports business, but Jess, I'll start with you. We'll work our way, or jump out anywhere. What are potential headwinds that threaten the energy behind sports business?
Well, I think a couple things. I'll start with the broader economy, specifically these potential taxes that are going to be put on teams in terms of not being able to take some of the I'm going to skip through that, but they're not going to be able to have as much savings as they historically have. Yep. So that's number one. The second thing, which I think is really interesting with respect to the PE and the investing that's coming in, and I think the NFL took its time on figuring out what they were going to do, requiring a 6-year hold period. I'm just, as someone who is more entrepreneurial in nature, I'm slightly concerned about the changes of who is owning and running teams, where it's historically been more entrepreneurial in nature, and what that means, because I think so much of the content and creativity has historically come from the teams, and so I think holistically as an industry, we need to be thinking about that.
But i.e., you're suggesting maybe the entrepreneurial nature may dissipate?
I think we need to be aware of this. I mean, there is significantly a change when it's more driven by, that you need to hit these specific, not that you don't need to hit these numbers, but there's a lot of sports teams that are not profitable.
Correct, a lot. Brian?
Yeah, I would agree with what Amy said. I think the economy is always an issue. I think Mark or Jonathan, I can't remember, brought up any disruption in global stability.
Correct.
Matters when you're running predominantly an event business at its core. I think how you build fans for the next 20 years was completely different how you did it for the last 20. And we at the NFL were sort of have a healthy paranoia about how do you actually fill the top of the funnel? How do you bring the next generation in? And the way I came to football and became a fan of football is going to be and is completely different of a 14-year-old now. And you can't, in this world where media is so fragmented, there's so many alternatives, you cannot take that for granted. And I think that applies to sports that have been around 100 years like ours, and I think new sports. And I think Jessica's point on how they get financed is interesting, is private equity has come in and has been the source of capital for some of these things at very high valuations. Mm-hmm. The underlying businesses of a lot of these things are not really where they are. They're not very mature. And I think the model of building a sports league, if I just put it together and I sell franchises, I'll find a media company to spend a lot of money and I'll break even on the popcorn and the tickets is not the model of the future. Like, I don't think that's easy to do unless you're a really established sports property. At the same time, you're going to have financing runways of, I invest and I exit in 3 to 5 years. That'll be interesting to watch. The NFL, for all intents and purposes, has taken a long-term view and has been funded by long-term personal capital. None of these owners are really sellers. And so the capital and the outlook is long. So if you mismatch the capital with the business objectives, it'll be interesting to watch that.
Right.
By the way, as somebody who has 3 teenage boys, I couldn't agree with you more. Yeah. The way my boys consume sports content is just radically different than the way you and I would.
Yep. Which is how? How do they consume sports content?
Oh, they are the classic Sunday ticket audience, right? They're watching 6 games at a time. Sometimes they watch the full game, sometimes they're not. They're just researching the player stats. NBA, they might just watch the highlights. So yep. It's very different.
Headwinds that you would see?
Listen, as a sector, it's interesting because we're about 6 years into the legalization of sports betting in the U.S. So on the one hand, you can say, hey, we're still in the relatively early innings. On the other hand, we're kind of entering what I would consider to be a new phase or a new era of growth, if you will, right? We still have, right now, only 50% of the U.S. can bet legally, right? You can't bet legally in California, in Texas, in Georgia. So we've got those states are harder to open, right? The first tranche of states, the New Jerseys, the Pennsylvanias, came relatively easy. We're now into that second phase where it's going to take a minute. But I'd also characterize the broader regulatory environment as one that we need to be very mindful of, right? You've got a lot of, there's more exposure around responsible gambling in the best way possible. It's one of the things that we partner up on, player integrity issues, which is, I think, one of the great things about legalizing sports betting is we kind of bring that into the light of day. And if we identify inappropriate behavior on our platform, we can shut it down immediately. I think the challenge is that sports betting is still misunderstood, right? You still have a $500 billion black market. You've got a gray market. And so part of what we have to do as we continue to safely open up the rest of the US is educate on the nuances of the market.
Raise your hand if you're doing some legalized sports betting so Amy can see a focus group here. Raise your hand if you're doing some illegal sports betting. Raise your hand.
No one's going to raise their hand.
There's a couple. I see
How many of you have
them.
your bookies?
Right. For Brian, has the overturn of PASPA been what you thought it would be?
That's a good question. I want to hear it.
Has it resulted in what maybe you...
I think so. I think what Amy suggested about getting the integrity right. I mean, the issue with sports betting in these sports leagues traditionally for years and years and years, it was always, you knew fans did it. The risk was, could it actually threaten the integrity of the game?
Right.
It was, Joe Namath got in trouble in the 60s for like going to a bar where there were sports gamblers happened to hang out, right? And so we always would stay far from the line. I think all the work companies like Amy and the leagues have done to make sure that the consumer protection and the integrity issues and the data sharing arrangements are all in place has been great in that I haven't seen integrity of any really sporting events be threatened. Like, I think that was always everybody's fear. If this stuff's run rampant, if you legalize it, then the probability of issues of integrity on the field or on the court or anywhere else is going to go up, and we haven't seen it, which I think is very, very
See
positive.
pockets of it. And
I think there's a little interesting cycle going on. So gambling, it's been legal for 5 years or
Since 2018.
But it's like really grown
Yeah.
meaningfully. And at the same time, streaming has also really grown meaningfully in that same
Yep.
period of time, and as has ticket prices. So people are more engaged, more watching more, and being more engaged because of gambling and those components, knowing more of what's happening, and it's leading to like this virtuous cycle of sports, like I would say, growing in its domination of the customer fan mindset.
Actually, to that point, Jess, Super Bowl this year obviously was a blowout. We had our single biggest day. We took 18 million bets on the platform. Live betting was huge. There was one that was the bunch of people, 34,000 people betting on one of the biggest comebacks of all time. I think the Chiefs were down 26 points, so you had 34,000 people saying they think they're going to come back and win the game.
They were all in Missouri.
Yeah, it's driving engagement to the live sports, even if it's a blowout.
Amy, when Netflix did the Christmas Day game, did you see a big spike in ways that you hadn't?
We did, and that was it. Yeah, that was obviously Netflix's first foray into NFL, and it was very successful.
I also think there was always a fear when gambling, and I think unfounded, but when gambling became legal in this country, that it was just going to take over the television broadcast, or the entire sports would pivot towards sports gambling. I don't think that's happened. I think it's been very well done, and I think everybody realizes while every gambler is probably an NFL fan, not every NFL fan's a gambler. And I think the way Amy's company, the way our broadcast partners and others have actually sort of walked that line from production and how the advertising you see, I think has been fine. So I think you can do both.
I would agree. Amazing how many questions, great questions. We'll get to a lot of them around fandom and understanding your fan. A theme this morning was how well you know your user or your fan. Brian hit on it. The way we generate or get new fans is going to be far different going forward than it has in the past. So my question is, how different will it be? What will it look like in terms of creating new fans? I mean, it used to always be your fan of the team you grew up watching and your parents grew up, generational.
So, I mean, we've done obviously a lot of work in this space across all of our clients in sports across every league. We touch over 70 million sports fans. And so in work that we've done, we've seen, especially in this younger generation, on average, people they have two favorite teams. And I mean, I see that with my own son, who asked for a Jalen Hurts jersey, where we obviously live here in Boston, for the holidays. So I think that's like a really unique perspective. But I think more broadly, the athlete power that has evolved. I mean, take LeBron James as like maybe the best example, where I think he has six times the number of social media followers as the Lakers. And so we are seeing this meaningful shift to the athlete, and it's incumbent upon the teams and the league to engage in that local way. And so we're seeing, and the folks who we work with, they're investing into their data, into their technology, in the ability to do personalized and targeted marketing. And I think like one of the best examples is NASCAR, who we literally worked with them, looked at the products. What are they actually having at the track? And is it priced correctly for the audiences that they have, but also the audiences that they don't have? And what are the markets they're in, and what are the markets they should be in, and which ones should they not be in anymore? And I think that is going to continue to evolve and change. And I mean, you're certainly doing that with your international expansion, but I think reaching these fans and growing the fans, it's incumbent upon the teams to invest and meaningfully reach out. Performance marketing and programmatic marketing is something that is very quickly, I think it is something that is not as used in the sports industry, certainly in consumer products. That is something that is coming with a force, and we're doing a lot at Kager to empower the teams to almost become like their own agencies to serve and directly connect with those fans.
I'll pick up on that theme of the power of the athlete, right? That is really what is driving the excitement around sports betting, right? I mean, if you look at our data, 90% of bettors do it because it makes what is already an unforgettable moment more entertaining. And if you unpack that, a big part of that is it's not just people betting on the over/under or the money line or the spread. 65-70% of the NFL bets involve player props, right? And when those narratives take off and you have these bigger names in the NFL than in NBA than any other league in the world, that really drives engagement, right? For the Super Bowl, 15% of the bets were on Saquon Barkley, some version of a player prop. So that's been a big driving force. And then live betting is still, there's still a ton of runway there, which again, it just keeps you engaged in that game. And a lot of that live betting is on individual players.
A question here to follow up on that. If you were trying to find the new fan of the future, how should we invest as an organization to target those fans? I.e., where should they double down? Social, like where are they going to get fans top of the funnel? Where are they going to find them? Or consumers?
For teams themselves?
Yes.
I mean, the challenge is that you have to know who the fans are and all the different ways that they're engaging with you. Like you have to create, you said top of the funnel, you have to capture them before they're actually spending with you. So, I mean, content has obviously been talked about a lot today. So that really to get them engaged and brought in. But then you have to capture that first party data. And we're not seeing that level of focus to, not only get the names and the emails, but like all of the different ways that they're engaging. And it's changing really, really rapidly. The way that I think about where we are from a digital marketing perspective today is where email marketing was about 20 years ago, which is specifically, you used to just take a list of names and you would send out an email and you wouldn't get it specifically to the person. That's effectively what is happening today with paid programmatic marketing, which is I'm gonna buy this list. All of the information lives with Meta and Google and the DSPs. And we as the folks who are like literally engaging with the teams, we have to figure out how to get that data and how to know how the fans are engaging so that we can better reach them.
I mean, Brian talked about it, right? As the landscape evolves and linear is declining, but still has a big user base, right? And you've got this huge proliferation of these streaming platforms. At the end of the day, like we have to take a diversified approach, right? You've got to partner up with the streaming platforms and reach them. We've got FanDuel TV that plays a certain role. We just partnered up we took the naming rights for the regional sports network. And so we're still you got to take a diversified approach, but you also have to be nimble to go where the fans are.
But it also doesn't need to be that complicated. So the NCAA, we do a lot of work with, and we did like a segmentation analysis on one of their championships, and literally identified this like super high value potential market to go after. And the most critical piece of data was how close they lived, and they weren't capturing that information. So now going forward, of course, it's part of everything that they do, but those people that they were able to identify, they spent 10x, and they drove massive attendance to that event. And you know, I think people like, oh, we got to do AI and all that. No, like, let's start simple. Let's get the foundation going. And the impact to the NCAA has been massive. They've grown their database by 30% just this past year.
For Brian Rollup in particular, give us a country that over-indexes where you haven't played yet for NFL fans. What's a growth international market where you haven't played yet that has strong NFL affinity?
Where we haven't played yet. Probably Spain. That's where we're going to play. That's why we're playing there. I mean, I think we over-index significantly in the UK, Germany, obviously Canada and Mexico. Brazil's increasingly growing. That's why we played a game there. I mean, we've made a multi-year commitment to the UK, and we've had football fans in Germany for decades. We used to have a league in Europe, and mainly in Germany. So I think those are the markets specifically.
Australia?
We're going to find out. Like, it's a huge sporting country.
Huge sport, yeah.
Huge sporting country. I think the way we do medal count in the Olympics is wrong. They should do it per capita. In the Summer Olympics, Australia always kills everybody.
Right.
People in China and the U.S. don't like that because we'd be lower. But like, I think it's a huge sporting. And what we've actually found, and this is what our UK experience has taught us, is that, you know, you may have sports fans in these countries that like football or don't know football, but here's what they do know. They know the difference between the varsity and the JV. And we used to play preseason games at these places all the time, and it wasn't that interesting. When you play a game that matters, people care because they know they should pay attention to it. And so bringing your best product into these markets, whether it's actually playing games or in your media strategy, becomes very, very important. So I think we're finding that. Yeah.
And you're finding the venues are more suitable. For years, venues weren't good enough.
They are. They have, you know, the U.S. is so far ahead in venue construction and what we do. I mean, if you go to Inglewood, California, and then within 1 mile between what the Clippers have done and what the Rams and Chargers have done is miles ahead of anything you see in Europe or anywhere else. So that is coming, and that's important. But I think the World Cup and other investments helping that. But I think that's just a matter of time.
For the group, you all were bullish on the growth of women's sports, but what are the headwinds facing continued growth in women's sports? Is it corporate sponsorship, suitable venues, or something else? Good question.
Well, I mean, all of the above.
Yeah.
Corporate sponsorships, I mean, the sponsors need to support and spend and not be asking for like a discounted rate. Because the investment is what helps drive and grow it. I think just for context, I'm an investor into the Utah Royals and on the NWSL board. The venue component, I think, you know, what's happening here in Boston with Jennifer Epstein, what Angie Long has done in Kansas City, where they actually own the venues, that's so critical because then they can actually set the schedule versus being at the whim. The reason the NWSL schedule comes out after the MLS schedule is because often the NWSL teams are second tenants or in some cases third tenants. And so that component is super critical. You know, and there's the women's sports, I mean, it has to continue to be seen at good times. I'll just like give this example. Last year, we all know the women's Final Four had more viewers than the men's Final Four, but that game was on Sunday afternoon. If it had been on Sunday night, it probably would have been another 25 or 30% higher. So it would have just maybe almost even doubled the men's. And so I think, like, why does that happen, and how do we collectively like identify? And I think, you know, you actually have a really interesting lens into seeing as those trends are starting to happen and where it's happening.
Well, it's interesting because we leaned in very early on, like several years ago. We were the first to do a sponsorship with the WNBA. We partnered with the Women's Tennis Association. I just announced a partnership with a professional women's hockey league, with women's lacrosse, and we view it as an important part of our strategy to reach. If you look at for NFL fans, 40% women.
A little higher, almost
a little
half.
higher.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mirror the sports betting user base. And so, first is just to your point, leaning in on some of the sponsorships and endorsing it. But also one of the headwinds historically, at least in our sector, is the betting product wasn't equitable, meaning if you looked at the WNBA betting product, it wasn't as good as the NBA product. But our risk and trading organization, many of who are out here, they're brilliant. They've invested in actually bringing those products up to snuff with their equivalent. But I think we're also trying to figure out how to reach women authentically, and I don't think we fully cracked it.
Yeah, and I think I agree with both of you. It's Jonathan said it earlier, Kraft on his panel, which is, the economics of sports is not that complicated. How many fans do you have? And I can tell you how big your business is going to be. And women's is in a huge growth curve and benefits from the increased exposure. People watch that Final Four game. Maybe some people watch it because of women or not. I watched it because it's an amazing athletic conference.
Right, it was.
And they were very good at what they do, and it was just a great event. Like focus on the product, increase the exposure, and the fans will come. Once the fans start to come, then you build your economics around it. But I think people forget that takes effort, investment, the right windows and time, and I think that's why the trajectory is here. And it gets back to our is there a mismatch with the capital versus the retail? Because it is a long-term sort of investment, but I think the trajectory is a really good one.
Well, and the other thing that's really interesting, and you can see the differences between the WNBA and the NWSL, which is many of the WNBA teams, they're housed with the men's teams. We do a lot of work with the Timberwolves and the Lynx, and like that model, being able to what the Indiana Fever was able to do in terms of like spiking up when they got Caitlin Clark is really interesting. On the other hand, there's a couple teams in the WNBA like Seattle Storm that they're separate. In the NWSL, you have a lot more separate teams, and so there's more investment going in there, more focus on the women's team, and so that is going to how is that going to grow and surpass, and how can you ensure when there is the interest and the growth that you're able to support it quickly and right away?
Right, because you have to be ready as an organization to handle the demand. This question here is, as we look at the future of sports business, for sports organizations like yourself or a sports team, the biggest opening for untapped revenue, or the biggest source of untapped revenue, would be? Mr. Roloff, as you look at the NFL business, what's the biggest potential for untapped revenue?
Hopefully it doesn't say sports betting, because that means I'm writing a bigger check.
Bigger check.
Our deals are coming up in sports betting. No. I think international is one for us.
Yep.
A long-term investment, but an important one. That's an obvious one. I also think a lot of our economic growth and revenue growth is actually sort of expanding the value chain of football. What do I mean by that? I mean, we created a joint venture a handful of years ago with Skydance Media to create a film studio. And we did that because we felt that as streaming platforms grew, premium content was going to be in more demand, and sports under indexed. And I don't just mean live events, I mean like sports docs and other things. We also felt that a good way to actually reach international audiences was to be on these streaming platforms. And so we weren't really equipped at NFL Films to do it, so we needed to capitalize a separate entity to actually create more of this content. In so doing, we created an entity that makes all sorts of sports content. They make scripted movies that have nothing to do with football. That's revenue diversification, that's value creation we've created that we used a strategic objective to do. I think you will see that increasingly. That's all stadium development is. It's building stadiums and creating new revenue streams around it that didn't exist before. So I think, we at the NFL, we think much broader about economic return and revenue, and way beyond the obvious revenue streams you have today, which is consumer products, sponsorship, and media. There's much more to go get.
Amy, for your business, where do you see untapped opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, listen, we still have a huge addressable market to go after. I mean, we think in maturity, sports betting and gaming could be a $70 billion market, right? So we still have a lot of runway ahead.
Where is it now?
Easy runway to capture, less than 20.
Okay.
But what we're very focused on as an organization is at the end of the day, if you don't have the best product in the market, you don't win. And so the innovation that we're focused on right now is really giving much greater choice and flexibility to the consumer. We have a product that we've been testing. We actually tested it in all markets over Super Bowl. It's called Your Way, and it effectively lets you set the line. So instead of the house predetermining what markets you're betting on, you can decide how many yards Josh Allen is going to pass for, right? Toggle it up or down, and then parlay that with any other combination. So that's not easy to do. The math to do that is very difficult, to be able to manage the risk and liability, but then to figure out how you create a user experience that feels like it was customized for you is what's our market.
To your point, Amy, a theme we've heard all morning, personalization. So more personalization, customization to the user, potential for more revenue, more optimization.
Yep.
And this is a follow-up here. I'm an NFL and betting junkie. How can you utilize more sports betting data to directly enhance my NFL viewing experience? That's for you two. Is there ways to...
Well, I think we're early in that.
Yeah.
I mean, Amy, you see the data, but you know, you have your phone open or your laptop, whatever you do, and you're watching, you're betting. People are creating these second screen experiences, but at some point, that's going to merge.
Yeah.
One, we have a product out called Watch and Bet, which we're working with Amy and others on, which is a low latency live game feed for the sports books. Latency becomes very important because you got to match it up to like the time to actually make a bet. We're very early in that. But at some point, I envision if you're not a sports bettor, then you'll have all your great linear ways to watch the Broncos game. If you're actually a sports bettor, we have a completely different curated low latency experience for you that is tailored for you. That's coming.
I'll give you a fun fact on that. So for live betting, obviously, we're taking in the availability of data in real time is critical. So for the Super Bowl, we actually used your NFL Next Gen stats, which uses player tracking technology. It takes a second and a half to take information in about an occurrence on the field or on the court, a second for our team to model it and push it back out, so 2.5 seconds. As that latency comes down, that improves. But I agree with Brian. I mean, I think in terms of what we can ultimately do to personalize betting experience, you could imagine a world where we have curated betting experiences and gaming experience for an individual based on our understanding of who you are.
And would that be through that? Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, just a thought. Often, or what we've seen is directionally where gambling is, how many people are engaged with it, the actual viewership follows. So thinking about what you said about prop bets, how could that potentially alter or focus on the media side on game day who you're following on the field? And are there other things to provide more perspective specifically? You mentioned Barkley at the Super Bowl. What could all of those people wanted to have, what they want to see? We talked about, of course, player cams and things like that, but what else can you do? So I think there's a lot of integration potentially to think through.
Yeah, I mean, we're barely on the integration. We're doing some, but I mean, we obviously, doing that through the NFL and our partners. But conversely, you might also be in a family where you don't want your kids exposed to sports betting, and so the ability to be able to toggle it off and personalize it in a different way is also powerful, right? Which also helps us, kind of build a sector for the long term.
And Brian, in your scenario with the different viewing, is that through a streaming service or that could be through Sunday Ticket? Could it be through a linear partner?
It could be all of the above. Yeah, I mean, I think to Amy's point, it's important that it's personalized, because if we have 50 million people watching the AFC Championship game, we know they all don't really care about the line, but a lot of them do, or have made bets, and so you need to personalize that experience. That lends itself a little bit better to obviously, IP delivered streaming solutions, but I think we've created somewhat customized solutions even on linear. One of the most popular things we do with ManningCast. ManningCast is the same sort of principle, completely different, which is you might be watching the Monday Night Football game and not particularly care about the teams. 1.5 million people are going over and watching them, or the score may be a little bit out of hand and they're sort of going into this alternative experience. So even on linear, you can actually sort of start to hyper serve fans, but digital obviously just makes it a lot easier.
For the focus group, raise your hand if you experience Monday Night Football only through ManningCast. Raise your hand.
Not only, but
I'm sorry, I just, some people do that. All right, question here. How can
the same guy who illegally bets race?
Don't shame people. Question here. How can we justify increasing franchise valuations when it seems a lot of metrics or KPIs in sports are flat or trending down?
It's a great
That's a Brian
question.
question.
I mean, I think this is why all the private equity capital coming is so interesting, and because valuations will be a little bit more transparent. But I think a lot of things support the high valuations of sports. One, in this crazy world we're talking about, where media and everything else is fragmented, live experiences that are unique are still just that unique and special. And that goes from everything from an athletic contest to a Taylor Swift concert. They're really different and differentiated, and I think that's going to continue. That's number one. Number two, good old-fashioned scarcity value.
Yeah.
You know, people buy NFL teams because they do well as a business, but they're kind of like Picassos. There are only so many. And so I think the scarcity value, I think, really, really, really helps. And I still think in the fragmentation of media, what we're seeing, if you get the right audience, it is harder and harder to, in all of this fragmentation of media where segmentation and personalization is very, very important, it's actually ironically putting more value on the few things left that can aggregate an audience at one time. And if you are interested in promoting to 25, 50, 125 million people the same message at one time, there's only a few places to do that. And if there are models that depend on that, whether it's driving subscription revenue, driving that type of advertising, sports becomes more valuable. And I think as those things migrate to streaming, they become even more valuable, because what is now happening is you can take a NFL game and you can aggregate 25 to 50 million people, but you can also target them. So imagine aggregating that many people, but if you are in Missouri and you want to get this advertising, or you've already expressed through this platform because it's interactive, your proclivity to buy a car, you're going to get that versus the Listerine commercial. That changes. So you're combining for the first time mass reach with real targeting. That's sort of going to drive, I think, event programming for a long time.
I mean, again, I've said this a number of times. I mean, we are firm believers of data as an asset. You talk about where the revenue is going to be coming from for teams, leagues, I mean, all of the ecosystem. And it's knowing your customer and your fan and then figuring out how to engage and monetize them differently. So I think like everything that you said. But the other component is this expansion. So, I mean, let's just take the Celtics right now, and you know what that's a brand. They don't own their venue. They don't own their training facility. And like, so where are the opportunities to potentially, I mean, that's a very well-run organization, very well-run, but that the opportunities are the real estate and some of the content. And I think that there are a number of, you probably, we talk when in the work we do with the NFL, you know, you have your top 10%, the middle, and the bottom 10%. Well, the top 10% have largely made a lot of those investments. That means there's like 80% that haven't yet. And so up and down, that's where the opportunities and growth is coming.
So they've been on panels with me before, and we always try to end with some fun, but also pertinent quick hitters. And so I've been asked already this afternoon and this morning from a lot of young people advice to get into the sports business. So I'm going to start with that one, start with Jess Gelman. For the young people in the audience, if they want your job in the future or a position like yours, what's your advice? We'll start with you.
Well, I think I loved what Michelle King said earlier today about paradigm shifts. So again, just for perspective, when I joined the sports industry 23 years ago, sports analytics wasn't a thing. And so recognizing maybe the skill sets or interests that you have that you can bring to bear, we're talking about a lot of the changes that are happening. How can you be part of creating where sports is going, whatever that might be? For me, it was analytics.
But my advice was going to be very similar, which is people talk about getting jobs, especially early in their career in sports, and I have to work for a league, I have to work for a club, I have to work for media, whatever it happens to be. You have to define sports broader. So I got my job at the NFL not because I like football. I actually had a skill set and experience that was relevant to them that they did not have. And I think that's also what's saying. Like, no one is hiring because you like football. They're hiring because you have something that they don't have and they need. So build a complementary skill set that is valuable, important, that is in demand. That's the best.
Jess
idea.
and I are laughing because we literally had this exact same conversation
Yeah.
yesterday. Because students always come, they're like, "I want to work in sports." We're like, "Well, the business of sports landscape is massive." And I always say, be flexible about when and how you get there. I didn't come into sports until I was 40 years old. When I ran Ticketmaster, that was the first time I was in sports. But I was a partner at McKinsey and had a very relevant skill set. So I couldn't agree with you more. It may sometimes taking that entry level position in sports may not be the right place to start.
And so your skill set was McKinsey. Brian, for those who don't know, your skill set was what?
Good question.
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure it out, right?
Good BS an interviewer.
Right,
See, no,
right,
no,
right.
I came from the media world. I was at NBC, and we were building out our media business.
All right, some other ones, some buy, sell, hold, some true, false. For Brian, roll up, or for anybody, true or false, piracy is one of the biggest untold threats to sports business.
I'd say true. I think IP protection in the digital world is still very, very, very important.
Totally agree. I mean, if you look at NBA consumption right now, I think there's a lot of viewing going on in some of those platforms.
And
I mean, I'll take the slant from the data angle. Investing in the security and the infrastructure. I mean, we do so much in that space, and it worries me, especially as organizations are thinking about like managing their data themselves internally. Like that is tremendous risk. And you look at what happened. I mean, I don't want to specifically call out teams and organizations. Amy, you might know one of them, and not FanDuel, but I think like, but
Thank you for clarifying.
right.
but it is like that data is so incredibly valuable. You can put a number on the value of every customer name that you have. And so again, data as an asset, making sure that you have not just like, yes, the technology, but like who has rights and can have access to that data. It's super critical.
We talked about it this morning, but a sport outside of one we've talked about, maybe this in this panel, a sport that you would bet on for the future in terms of a growth sport.
I'm very high on volleyball right now. I know Caitlin Gow is here, who started Love Bee. I love the model that she put together. I'm not an investor yet. But I just think volleyball, if you look at, again, the NCAA and in particular the women's volleyball championship, it sells out. They're having massive events of 50,000 plus. Like that is something that is coming. There's 3 leagues right now. There will obviously be consolidation. I just think that's an interesting space.
I still think where there's misalignment between participation and excitement and monetization is pickleball.
Yeah.
Pickleball.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would probably, using Amy's thesis, say golf.
Yeah, I agree with
Golf's
that.
a growth sport
100%.
based on where.
If they can organize and
Right.
manage appropriately.
Yeah.
I will say there are more conversations that I have around pickleball as could it be a viable sport business because participation numbers. All right, so this is buy, sell, hold. Ready for this? Buy, sell, or hold boxing.
Gosh. I don't like violence.
So is that a sell or a hold?
Sell.
Whoa.
48 hours ago,
Yeah.
a sell.
But
Now-
TKO.
Now I'd buy it.
Now you
because
buy.
of TKO.
Because of the
because of
TKO.
TKO.
I mean,
deal.
yes.
I'm a hold.
Hold. Unrivaled. Buy, sell, or hold.
Which unrivaled?
Unrivaled, the women's 3-on-3.
Start there.
Buy.
I'm buying it.
I'm holding. I struggle a little bit with the full court 3-on-3. I love the one-on-one.
But my point is they're actually solving a problem that now these women are getting paid year round.
Yeah.
Which I think is a really interesting model. And if those two things, WNBA and Unrivaled could kind of make that work, and the expansion of any women's basketball, I would buy.
I'm worried about the injuries.
Fair point.
What happens first? Tom Brady raises the Vince Lombardi trophy or Tom Brady leaves Fox Sports?
Oh, jeez.
I never said these would be easy.
I'm recusing myself.
Okay,
Yeah.
I figured. All right, last question. Trump administration will be an ally or a foe to sports? Nobody wants to
I
take
have
that?
no idea.
Yeah, it's too early to tell. I mean, I don't know.
Too early to
It's too
tell.
early
Yep,
to tell.
it's too early to tell. I mean, he's sports fandom I mean, he's there, he's out there.
Could be a jump ball.
It could be a jump, yep, could be a jump ball.
No idea.
All right, well, there were good sports to go through that. I know I didn't give him any lead time or prep time on that one, but give it up for the birthday girl, Jess Gelman, Brian Rolap, Amy Howe, and hope everybody has a great afternoon. Great to see everyone.